Content warning for today's episode, which includes a brief discussion of suicidal thoughts. When you think of the word addiction, what comes to your mind? I think for most people, the most common thought would be drugs or alcohol. For some people, it's very easy to fall into that. I'm always thankful that I was never interested in smoking because tobacco addiction is a really difficult thing to beat. And there are other categories. You can be addicted to eating, gambling, dieting, or even petty crimes like compulsive shoplifting. Today's guest is Fenna. She stumbled into her addiction without even realizing it. In fact, she works in mental health, and she didn't even realize that what she was experiencing was an addiction. Fenna was addicted to a person. Real people in unreal situations.
The eerie silence when I walked in, and he's just staring at me.
I was like, hello, like, are you okay? And then I had to tell him it was me.
There was just blood everywhere.
They're shouting, they're screaming, they're being hit by bullets, they're hitting the ground.
And in that moment, I literally thought, this is how I die.
Everything changed then.
And I just thought to myself, this isn't happening.
Every single story deserves to be heard.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? Before this happened, how many times would you guess that you had been in love?
I don't think I have been in love that much, but the few times that I was in love, it was very strong. And I even remember when I was 4, I think I was very much in love with a very young kid, of course. But I also been in love with the same boy my whole primary school. So that's about 5 or 6 years. I had only had a crush on one boy, and he was it for me at that time.
Faithful from a young age. That's pretty amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's talk about a little bit about who you are. What kind of work do you do?
I'm a coach and a counselor for over 10 years now. I guide people with burnout and stress symptoms. But I also have another job, and I've been doing that for almost 25 years now. And that is, I give chemotherapy, and I'm working with adolescents with depression and trauma mostly. And that's a group therapy.
So you're familiar with the terms and the things around mental health?
Oh, yes. Well, at least I thought I was, yes.
Before this happened, you had just been through a divorce.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit? And were there any children involved?
Yes. Me and my ex-husband have one son, and we were going through a divorce. And it was a really friendly divorce, luckily, also for me, because at that time we were also in full-blown lockdown because of COVID. So me and my husband were going through a divorce while we were locked down in the same room 24/7. So I was happy that we were on good terms.
After that happened, were you actively looking for a new romantic interest?
Well, not really initially, but, after a while, I decided that, maybe it was time to start dating again. And so, I don't hang out in bars that often anymore. So, of course, we tend to use the online dating. And in this case, I decided to have a look on Tinder.
Tinder, okay. Very popular dating app.
Yes.
And you met someone.
Yes, I met someone. His name was Robert. It was a long-distance relationship. He lived in a different country. And, I wouldn't say the first week, but after a few weeks, and I still remember the moment that he popped up in my head, and I decided, or I started to develop feelings for him rather quickly, and it was absolutely amazing. It was, we had this deep connection. And we had a lot of contact. It was really, well, I think we all know the feeling of falling in love and how wonderful that can be. And it was really nice. It was really nice.
You said that he was in another country. Where are you located?
I'm located in Holland.
Okay. So you're in Holland. How is it that you matched up with someone that's not even in your country? Wouldn't you put that as one of the filters? You want to be local or something?
Yeah, on Tinder you can, the search of matching people can be within Europe, I think even worldwide, or you can add the amount of miles you want to be looking for. And I don't know really why, but mine was right open, at least within the European Union. So everyone within Europe or a certain amount of miles I could see. It can also be that because he traveled quite often for work, that he had been in Holland. So that's why he popped up in my Tinder, which is that would also be an explanation for him showing up in my Tinder search.
So you met him, his name is Robert, and what did you know about him?
Well, first, I didn't know anything about him, but we started talking, and of course, he was single. We talked about work. I talked about my background. We had a nice time, really. It was nice. It felt safe. Felt pretty safe. Nice contact. Nice guy. Gentle man.
Yeah, I would say since he's in another country, it's completely safe to some degree. But what made you feel like he was a perfect match for you?
I think in hindsight, I think it was more feelings based. And of course, we had nice talks. I had a nice sense of humor, but I was absolutely smitten. I really liked this guy. I had, the butterflies all over. I was absolutely blown away by his a little bit of introverted personality. I really liked him.
How quickly did that happen, or how quickly did things progress?
Things progressed pretty quickly, and in hindsight, I would say too quickly. But even before we met, I already was completely taken and, blown away by this guy.
You mean before you met in person?
Before we met in person, yeah, we did eventually meet in person several times. But before we met in person, I was already a little bit detached or attached on him, I must say. Before we even met in person, staring at my phone, hoping for a message, not really having any wanting to date other people anymore. This was it for me at the time.
Yeah, you described your feeling at this time as giddy.
Yeah.
That seems to indicate sort of an obsession with someone.
I started to notice that my mood was depending more and more on whether we did have contact or we didn't have contact. For example, and I didn't really like this feeling. It was like, something's going on here. I noticed that when we had contact, everything was good. My life was okay. I was happy. Things were doing okay. But when we didn't have contact, that I started to feel a little bit irritable and restless, a little bit anxious. And that seemed to progress. Now, also due to his work and also his personality, the contact that we had was intermittent. So it was a little bit unpredictable. It could be minutes. It could be, and of course, a lot was online. Most of the contact was online. It could be minutes. It could be hours. It could be also days before I heard something. And I noticed that this started to occupy my mind more than I wanted to, really. I started to only think of this, and I couldn't. It wasn't a matter of just thinking, okay, stop thinking about this. It's not that important. It was occupying my mind all the time. I was slowly kind of losing my sense of self. I started to have problems with this. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't just not think about this person, and my mood started to swing from, like I said, like really high, like floating on air, to really low. I had never experienced this on this level, and I started to be a bit worried to be honest.
Did he feel the same way about you, do you think?
In the beginning, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think also for him, he was absolutely smitten. As things progressed, I started to notice that, he pulled away a little bit more, which only made my anxiousness even more. But especially in the beginning, he was absolutely smitten also, yes. Which, of course, we had to talk about our deep connection and things like that, and how wonderful it was that we met, and what a coincidence and all that.
You've said that your feeling at this time, it felt uneasy. What did you think was going on?
I didn't really know, but I noticed that it had to do with the amount and the quality of the contact that I had with this guy. So I could link my mood swings, which I normally don't have. I see myself as a quite calm, stable person, but I started crying, and I noticed that it had to do with the contact, and I could see myself be more and more depending and being more anxious in the contact. I started to think that it had something to do with attachment. Maybe I was more anxiously attached, but I couldn't really define it. I only knew that I was suffering at one point. I wasn't really happy anymore. Sometimes I felt happy or a little bit euphoric. Well, quite euphoric when there was contact, but if there wasn't, I couldn't regulate anymore. Nothing else. I mean, I could have won the lottery, literally. I could have won the lottery and won $1 million, and I would have been miserable if I didn't hear from him that day. On the other hand, my house could have burned down, and if I just had received a text from him, I could have been smiling, which was concerning, and I didn't really know what was going on with me.
Had you ever had this happen in any previous relationships?
When I look back, I think yes, but not so severe, not to this level that I was crying all day, and at one point I had to take sleeping pills because I wasn't sleeping anymore. I mean, this was taking over my life, and this was crushing me. I lost my sense of self. People started noticing that I was checked out most of the time. I was in my head. I was thinking a lot. I was obsessing, and people started to notice that. It was like as if I was in this constant state of fight or flight, and like I said, I was losing my life a little bit. I never had this. No, I could not identify it. I just knew that something was really wrong with me.
How did this affect your relationship with your son? How old was your son at this time?
My son was 14 at the time. I could not give him the attention that I wanted to give him because my mind was preoccupied all the time. In my mind, I was fantasizing. I was checked out most of the time, which, looking back, I have a lot of regret of being so checked out at that point, but it was not something that I had control over. There was nothing I could do basically to stop thinking about this person because I could not.
At the time, were you consciously aware of, wow, I'm neglecting some of my motherly duties, but I can't help it? Was that kind of the way you looked at it?
Yes. I was aware that I was not. I mean, it's not okay to have a mom who's crying in bed. That's not okay. So I was aware that, something was off within me and I couldn't provide like I wanted to. I was aware of that, but I couldn't stop it. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I tried to identify it. I started Googling. I started reading into things, Googling on symptoms, but there were no answers at the time.
How long did this go on like this?
I think it was for 3/4 of a year, something like little less than a year.
How did it affect your work?
I remember I was working, I was behind my computers, and in the hallway I heard 2 colleagues, and they were laughing. They were just chit-chatting and just laughing. And I remember thinking, oh my God, these people they're so carefree. They're just chit-chatting and just laughing. And for me, that had been months and months ago. I could almost not remember how it was to live carefree. I felt imprisoned. I was stuck in misery, and I didn't know how to get out. That even something normal as hearing people laugh and just chit-chat made me realize that there was something completely wrong.
As a mental health professional yourself, did you decide to seek help through therapy?
Yes, I decided to seek help. I'm not afraid to ask for help when I notice that there's something wrong with me. So I saw several therapists, and I remember one therapist, in hindsight, very well-meaning, told me that I had to go after the love of my life, which was the worst advice that someone could give me. But little did she know, little did I know. But I've seen a few therapists, and they didn't really know. They couldn't give me the answers. What they did was they kind of diagnosed me on the symptoms that I showed at that moment. I got a wide range of diagnoses, and which didn't resonate with me because I never had these symptoms before I met Robert. So I think they thought I was pretty stubborn. For example, they diagnosed me with a codependent personality disorder, which I don't have. But I understand now because they were diagnosing me on the symptoms that I was showing. And of course, when I tell them, I only think about this person, I only want to be with this person, I can think of nothing else. Of course, they diagnosed me, but they weren't accurate. I don't have that.
So this all came to a head. What was your decision about how you could stop feeling this way?
Well, just telling myself to, not feel this way didn't help. I tried this with cognitive behavior therapy. I tried all kind of things to meditate, to calm myself down while staying in contact with this person because, I really like this person and I didn't really want to give that up. But then again, it felt so unhealthy. I was like, okay, apparently there's something really wrong in this contact. And also he was not really giving me what I wanted. I wanted to have a defined relationship and he didn't. So I decided that I had to cut contact. And I was dreading this because it felt like I was so attached to this person. It felt like, okay, there's something coming my way and I'm not going to like it when I'm going to end this contact. But I was exhausted. I had no other choice.
Was he aware of the problem that you were having?
No, not to this extent, because I tried to hide that. Of course, I was not telling him, oh, by the way, if we don't have contact, I'm going in full blown. I'm in the midst of crazy town when we don't have, I'm obsessed with you. No, of course not. But of course, he knew that I was my state was low, that my mood was low when we didn't have contact for a few days. I told him sometimes that I was struggling with the amount of contact that we had and the unpredictableness with it. But I didn't let him in to how I was doing.
I would think if you told him all of the issues that you were having, it might scare him off, right?
Oh, for sure. For sure. And that was, at that time, the last thing that I wanted, that he would run away.
So you decide you just got to break it off with him. Were you nervous about ending it? What did you think might happen? What would you think the result would be?
I didn't want to, that's for sure, because everything in me wanted to attach instead of detach. I didn't want to. But I was, like I said, I was exhausted. I knew that something had to give. And anything was better at that point than to stay in this prison of how bad I was feeling. So I was also a little bit hopeful, like, okay, I'm going to feel really bad probably. But, maybe after 2-3 weeks, I'm going to be better. I'm going to feel okay. I'll be heartbroken. But of course, in a few weeks, I'll be okay. And so I was kind of maybe naively a little bit hopeful that things would started to get better once I stopped the contact with Robert.
I would think it's okay to go through a tough breakup because you just want your life back.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was my goal. I just want my life back. I'm a shadow of who I used to be, and this is not healthy. So that's what I decided. I thought anything that's coming is going to be better than what I'm feeling now. I had no choice.
So you called him to put an end to the relationship. What was that phone call like?
It was traumatizing. I still remember where I was, what I was wearing. I tried to explain that, I wasn't happy in this. I was also maybe a little bit blamey towards him, that sometimes I didn't hear anything. And at the end, I told him, I can't do this anymore, and I want to stop this. And then, of course, I wanted him to say, no. And he kind of did, but not really. Not enough for me to change my mind. So then we hang up, and that was it.
Wow, that's interesting. You were kind of hoping he would talk you out of it.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I was hoping he would talk me out of it very much. Yes.
Did you tell him the reason you were ending it?
I told him that I wasn't happy. And I told him that even friends were seeing that I was not happy, and that this had affected my life in a negative way. I didn't give him all the details, obviously, but I told him that this was not healthy for me.
So he was put up a little bit of a fight about it, but overall he was okay with it.
He seemed to be, well, not as, in absolute panic state as I was. He was more like on the okay, if that's what you want, I understand side. Yes.
You finish that call and hang up the phone. What happens?
Shit hits the fan. I remember 2 minutes after, I completely collapsed. It was as if my nervous system was giving all these alarm signs, as if I was dying. I was shaking. I was not okay. I was really, really bad. And I called a friend. He kind of collected me from the floor, if I remember. He had put me in his bed. I was shaking. I was really bad. And it's continued to be this bad for days. Throwing up, having severe crying attacks almost. I must say, I was in a really, really bad place. And I remember that friends were kind of looking at me, and also my mom, when I had her on the phone and I couldn't stop crying, that people were wondering, like, okay, what's wrong with you? What is this? We don't know you like this. And at that point, I didn't know what was wrong with me yet. I remember I was so sensitive to stimuli. For 2 weeks, I couldn't watch television. I couldn't listen to music. I didn't work for 2 weeks. It felt like my body was in war, literally. My body was fighting a war, which was very, very painful. Also physically painful.
Yeah, you're describing all of these as these are physical symptoms.
Yes, they were.
Did you know instinctively it was because of that phone call where you broke it off? Or did you think maybe something else was going on here?
No, I knew that it was because of the phone call, because immediately, the moment I hung up the phone call, there was a part of me who said, what have you done? What have you done? You should reconnect. Maybe there's a way. I started bargaining in my mind. I had this part of me who said, no, this is not healthy for you. Keep going. It will get better. And there was this part of me who said, almost panicky, like, what have you done? You should be with this person, You can't leave this person. You should reconnect. Maybe you can make it work. Of course you can make it work. There was this obsessive thinking all the time, and the doubt, and going into a puzzle in my mind, thinking maybe I can do something to reconnect and be regulated at the same time. So yes, I knew it had everything to do with this person, everything.
I would think your friends and your family would just feel helpless.
Oh, yes.
Not knowing what's going on. And your mom lives close to you, right?
Yes.
Okay. How was she handling this?
I remember she's not that of a very emotional person, but I remember she was crying at one point because I was crying so hard that she obviously felt bad for me, but also kind of desperate. And I remember her saying, please keep looking for a doctor or a therapist who can, don't give up, please, keep finding answers and, don't give up and maybe someone can tell you what's wrong with you one day. It must have been very hard to see me in a state like that, especially when I was almost 50 at that time. I never had experienced something like this before. They didn't know what hit me.
The therapist you were speaking with didn't know what was going on, but the answer had to be out there somewhere.
Yes.
What kind of research were you doing, or how did you actually find what was happening?
At one point, I was again on the internet searching on my symptoms, like obsessive thinking. I don't know what I put in my Google search. And then I found the term limerence.
Limerence.
Limerence, yes. And limerence is an altered state of being addicted to another person. And when I saw the symptoms and the describing of the state of limerence, it ticked all the boxes. And I was like, okay, I have the answer here. I am in the state of limerence. I finally found what's wrong with me. I had slowly trained my brain into a addiction by the unpredictable or the intermittent reward I got in the contact with this person. And the two main ingredients for limerence are obstacles and hope. And hope to become a pair, to form a pair, to become a couple in the future, which I recognize also really a lot. So, like I said, I ticked all the boxes and I finally had the name for my condition.
So none of the professionals that you'd spoken with before were familiar with this, apparently.
No, none of them. None of them. No, unfortunately, I must say, because it would have saved me a lot of pain, I think.
How common is this? I'd never heard of it before.
I don't know the exact numbers. I've seen various of numbers because I've taken a deep. I started to Google. I started to read. I started to listen and collect all the information there was. And nowadays there's more information out there. But years ago there was very little information, almost nothing online. I've seen different numbers. I've seen 5% of people go through this. It depends a little bit on how you define limerence, because Dorothy Tanev wrote a book of love and limerence in the 70s, and she kind of approached limerence as more as the early infatuation state of an early romantic relationship. Well, we all been in love. You can call that also limerence, but I talk more about the pathological, really being addicted to a person and not being able to get out. I would say, if I had to put a number on it, I would say maybe 20% of the people go through this, which is a lot. Or surprising that so little people have heard of this, and also so little. I mean, it's not a DSM diagnosis yet. I hope it will be one day, but so little people have knowledge about this state of mind, which can be very disruptive.
Is there a spectrum of severe limerence or minor limerence, or is it just all one diagnosis like that?
No, it's a spectrum. When you're in love, you can be heartbroken. You can be a little bit depending on someone. You can be a little bit obsessed. That all is pretty common, to think of nothing else when you're in love. Now, if you continue with the intermittent reward and you have a vulnerability for addictions, it can become more on the pathological side of the spectrum. You can really feel the consequences of it. And then it's also harder to walk away. And you also have to go through withdrawal. So yes, I absolutely believe that it's a spectrum, and it can get pretty bad.
There's so many similarities to actual drug addiction.
It is actually the same. Yes. The mechanism in our brain, the seeking relief, the building up tension, the building up pressure, then, the seeking relief within the contact, and then the whole cycle of the repeatingness of this, it is actually exactly the same as a drug addiction. So I learned by that time that was why I was shaking and vomiting on the floor was because I was in full-blown withdrawal. I was in withdrawal without drinking or without touching drugs, but it is exactly the same mechanism inside my nervous system. My hormones were so dysregulated that it took time with the absence of the addictive substance, in this case it was a person, to regulate again.
Yeah, your body has to take time to heal, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
How long did that withdrawal stage last?
I would say the withdrawal lasted for 1 or 2 weeks. So then your hormones get, a little bit more regulated. But then what is happening is when you detach from an LO, and LO, Roberto was my LO, we call that a limerent object. So the person we are limerent for, we call that a limerent object. So in my case, Robert was my LO. And when you detach from an LO, you don't only go through the withdrawal, but you also go through a very, very deep grief process. Because my nervous system had mistaken LO for a very important attachment figure. So I was in very deep grief, and this was a force so strong that it almost felt spiritual, or it almost felt like, I had to go through I would say almost a rebirth process. This wasn't just, I'm going to cry for a few weeks and then I'm okay. This was so big that at one point I also noticed, like, this is not about him anymore. I mean, I hardly knew the guy. When you think of it, this is not, a family member that died. This is a flood of grief that is so much bigger than just this person. There is something else going on.
Did you ever get to the point where you considered taking your own life?
Yes, it's quite common in limerent grief that you at one point start to have suicidal thoughts because the pain is so big that sometimes you just think, okay, anything besides this pain is better. So yes, I had suicidal thoughts. I also remember that one time I was crying so hard that I thought that my neighbors would be come knocking on my door to see if I was okay, because, they were kind of tantrums of crying that came out of me. And, that's where I thought, okay, this has to do with something that is bigger than just, the love that I feel for one person. This is more profound. This is bigger than him, basically.
You said your withdrawal symptoms were roughly 2 weeks.
Yes.
But you also said you're going through a grief process, and grieving usually takes longer than a couple of weeks. How long did that last?
Oh, yes. Grief always takes longer than we want it to take. It takes longer than we hope it will take. And it takes longer than we have the energy for. Now, I think looking back, I think my grief lasted for 2.5 years, which was very heavy. It was very, very difficult. But of course, the first months were more difficult than I wasn't that bad during the whole period of 2.5 months. But looking back, coming out of a limerent fog, as we call it, it had taken over. I think it took me 2 years or maybe even a little bit longer to really come out of the limerent fog and say, okay, now I can state that I'm not longer in limerent grief. It took that long to detach, basically, yes.
One of the other things that comes to mind in someone who's addicted to a drug is, as you're trying to get free from that, you might relapse. Did you ever try contacting him again?
Oh, yes. I relapsed. I relapsed. We reconnected for a few months. And then, I found myself in the exact same place where it was like any other addict would say. And I thought that after a few months, I could handle things. Maybe, I can drink now while simultaneously not wanting to drink, like I assume alcoholics think. So yes, I relapsed a few times, which is common. But I found myself, like I said, at the exactly same place, and I didn't want to be there. So then I did it again, and I again had to go through the withdrawal, and again had to go through the grief. But this time I was determined to stay in the grief and endure the pain until I was out, because I wanted to be a better mom and I wanted to be happy. I had everything in my life to be happy, and I was miserable. And I didn't want it anymore. So this time, every day, I told myself, I have the right to be happy, and that's why I'm not going to contact this person. But it was challenging because a big part of me was bargaining with me and persuading me and manipulating me. The limerence, it was as if the limerence was on my shoulder, whispering to me every second of the day that it's really better to reconnect, that this time it will be different. Limerence is a very strong force. Basically, I had to go against my own nervous system. I wanted, this person back in my life, and I had to tell my nervous system every day, no, we're not doing that. We are enduring the pain. We're not going back. It was incredibly difficult. And I remember a few times where I had, typed in a message, and it was just a matter of pressing the send button. And then, with a little strength I had still in me, I was like, okay, if my cravings are still on a 10, I can send Roberto a message, but now I'm going to, take 5 minutes to walk outside. And then luckily when I came back, my cravings were at a 9 and not at a 10 anymore. And then I could kind of postpone the contact until it became more easy. But it was really rough. Yeah, it was a rough time.
Is it your work in the mental health field that gave you tools like that to use to figure this out, how to get past it? Or did you just instinctively know how to get through it?
Well, I knew that, being addicted. And at that time, I had some knowledge about limerence because I had read everything I could find on the internet. So I know it was a people addiction. I know this had to do with childhood trauma or inherited attachment wounds, inherited trauma, than it had to do with actually being a perfect match with this person. And that the limerence was actually a symptom or an indication that I was not a match with this person. So I kind of knew that my reality was distorted, and this was not my soulmate. This person was the opposite of my soulmate. So I knew what I had to do, and that was stay out of contact. And simultaneously, I started to do a lot of, I would say, healing work of attachment wounds and trauma that I didn't even know was there.
Was there a particular day where you said to yourself, wow, I'm fixed, I'm cured? Or was it just very, very gradual over time?
It's very gradual, very, very gradually. You cannot really say, okay, on Sunday, I'm still, a little bit in limerence, and on Monday, I'm out of it. But it doesn't affect my life anymore. I don't care anymore. So I can say I am detached I did my grieving process, and I am detached from this person. Absolutely. Yes.
With that success, you now had a mission. You want to help others. How did that work?
Yes, absolutely. I started to connect with people online who were also in limerence.
How did you find those people?
Well, first there was this website, and there was a community also. There are also forums out there. I started to combine the work that I already did as a trauma therapist, and limerence is trauma related. So I started to combine the two, and I started to write my own content. I started to make little films for YouTube, and I decided that this was something that I could help people with because there's so little knowledge out there, and I wanted to make this my life work. As they say, trauma gives mission and also gives you a sense of control in a traumatic experience. So I started my YouTube channel, and then the stories of other people in limerence came pouring in. And they were all, and still are, they are heartbreaking. They're really, really, I hear really, really sad stories of people in limerence.
What are some of the situations you've heard of?
Well, first of all, they all tell me, okay, oh my God, I didn't know what I had until 1 week ago. I finally had the answer, which also happened to me. So we all kind of share this, that for months, sometimes for years. I talked to people who are in a limerent episode, as we call it, for 20 years. And they didn't know what they have. And when they contact me, they say, oh my God, I just realized I just came up with the term limerence and I tick all the boxes. Now I know that I'm not going crazy and I'm not losing my sanity, but what I have has a name, which, gives a lot of hope to people. I also speak to a lot of spouses of people who are in a limerent episode. What happens is if you are in limerent, you enter an altered state. So you act, you think, and you behave, and you feel completely different as you would normally. So people who are married and they go through limerence, they go through really severe change of character. Now, people who are in a limerent state in a marriage, they want to divorce as quick as possible. They want to be with their LO. There's a pace to it. There's a haste to it. They want to divorce and leave there sometimes, before the limerence become really good marriage and leave everything behind. And unfortunately, people who are in limerence don't care about their spouse anymore, but they often don't care about their kids anymore, which is temporary, because limerence is temporarily. It depends a little bit on how you nurture it, but I hear very devastating stories of people saying, we just had a baby and now my wife is off with somebody and she moved to another country and, we're basically being abandoned. All the stories I hear from the limerence themselves, but also from the people who are in limerence are very devastating. I also hear a lot of people who are being misdiagnosed based on the symptoms. They have severe mood swings, so they get the diagnosis, for example, bipolar disorder, and they're put on lithium. People who are getting the diagnosis borderline personality disorder because they're so unstable. OCD, I hear a lot of diagnoses, and of course that can be true. It can be the case that you have borderline personality disorder, for example, and you are in the state of limerence, which is true. But then you should have had the symptoms of the disorder before the limerence began and after, and not only during the limerence. So there's a lot of misconception and a lot of damage outside.
Just like when you were searching for an answer.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody really knew.
Yeah.
This podcast is being heard by hundreds of thousands of people. So just based on the percentages, some of them are suffering with this now. What should they do? What's the first step for these people?
If you hear my story and you think, oh my God, that's me, educate yourself about limerence. Don't make radical decisions. Don't divorce. Don't move to another country. Don't give up your job because you think that you found your soulmate in this other person in LO, because, like I said, limerence is an indication that there are attachment issues not only in you, but also in the other person. And limerence is an indication or a symptom or a result of an unsafe bond, not of a safe bond, but an unsafe bond. So don't follow your limerent object into the abyss, and educate yourself about limerence, and please find a therapist who is maybe not even aware of the term limerence, but who knows about attachments and about attachment wounds, and also maybe about trauma.
Is there always hope for someone that has this? Or is there anyone that's just too far gone and they can't be helped?
Of course, like any other addiction, people beat addictions all the time. Unfortunately, we cannot really check into a Betty Ford, or we cannot really go to a limerent anonymous meeting, because there's just not enough knowledge there that this is also a problematic form of addiction. But there is a lot of knowledge out there right now. There is a lot of content out there, so you can educate yourself. And of course, you can also always take action and be proactive and decide to get out of this. That starts with, as we call it, going no contact, and cut the contact with the limerent object. which is the hardest decision for an addict, to stop doing the things that you are addicted to. But that has to be done. That has to be done. And then, if you stay out of contact for a longer period of time and you do your grief, you will get out of limerence, absolutely, because, our brain has neuroplasticity. So our brain rewrites, takes new experiences and rewrites old feelings. It processes things. Our brain is always changing. So yes, there's absolutely hope for people who are in limerence. But first you have to be aware that you're in limerence and not think that it's just a matter of time before you can be with your soulmate. I sometimes speak to people who have been doing this. They are in limerent hope for 20 years.
Yeah, and I think it would seem like part of it might be how much of an incentive they have to get out of it.
Oh, absolutely. You have to be determined, because this is not easy. If you're just a little bit determined or half determined, then, you have to be full in. And you have to have a reason. Like my reason was, I want to be a better mom. I don't want to be a checked out mom. My son only has one mom. I have to be there. I have to do it. There's not a second chance for his childhood. And I also wanted to be happy. So you have to have two main goals. You have to have two reasons, at least one or two reasons why you're going to do the hard work. And then you also have to look deeper at why you became limerent in the first place, because limerence is an indication that there are unsuppressed or suppressed needs, and maybe you also have to do some healing work and look at your childhood.
Well, obviously you are equipped to help people with this. How can people contact you?
I have a YouTube channel. It's called Following Fenna. Of course, you can have a look there and watch some of my videos. I give everything. I don't hold back in any advice because I want to help as many people as I can in a limerent episode. And I'm afraid that there are millions of people out there who have no idea what they're going through or their spouse is going through. So I put as much as content out there as I can. I also have a website also called followingfenna.com where people can contact me to see if I can help them.
And we'll have links to those in the episode notes for this episode, and people can go there and contact you if they need to. Is there any part of this that we haven't talked about that you want to mention?
Limerence is also an opportunity. I only expressed the pain and the grief and the obsession and, the nerve-wracking side of it. But there's also a good in limerence, because limerence brings out to the surface that what was still covered. Limerence brings out that there were unmet needs before the limerent episode began, but also there is still some therapy to do. So limerence can also be, that's the good side of it, an opportunity to heal and to live a more purposeful and more life with integrity. So that's the good thing of it.
That's good. We like a silver lining. Yeah.
There's a silver lining. Absolutely. It's just a very painful silver lining.
Fenna, I appreciate you sharing your story. Hopefully we can help a few people with this.
I really hope so. Yes. Thank you.
If this is a topic you're interested in, you should check out Fenna's YouTube channel. She talks a lot about limerence and other related topics. Links to that and her website are in the episode notes at whatwasthatlike.com/199. And if you're on Reddit, there's a whole subreddit where you can ask questions and connect with other people. It's just r/limerence. That link is in the episode notes too. And I'm wondering, do you think you are limerent? I know there are some people listening to this who are in this addiction right now and probably weren't even aware of it until hearing Fenna's story. If that's you, I'd love to hear about it. Call in your comments to the podcast voicemail line anytime, 24/7 at 727-386-9468. We've got an interesting question right now in the Facebook group. What movie traumatized you as a kid? When I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to watch movies that would have any effect like that. but I did see one as a teenager that was pretty chilling. If you want to weigh in on that, come on over. We got a question like that every Tuesday. Join the group at whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. And if you liked this episode, you might enjoy a conversation I had not too long ago with Frank. That's episode 182 from this past July, titled Frank Bought 500 Pills a Week. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. All right, are you ready for this week's listener story? This is how we end every episode, with a 5 to 10 minute story sent in by a listener. If you have an interesting story, and you know you do, find a quiet place and record it on your phone, then email it to me, scott@whatwasthatlike.com. In this week's story, Ashley tells us about a motorcycle crash, ×2. Stay safe, and I'll see you back here in a week with a really fun flashback episode.
Hey, Scott. My name is Ashley, and I've been listening to your podcast for years now. I love listening to other people's stories and how they persevered through tragic events. I never thought I'd have a story worthy enough to submit until my husband and I had accidents that involved some pretty surprising coincidences. In early December of last year, we bought a private sale used Suzuki GXSR 1000 sport bike. The seller had neck surgery and the bike had been sitting for years. He put a lot of hard work into it. He loved that thing, but ultimately needed the cash since he was barely making ends meet and it was nearing the holidays. Since the bike sat for so long, it developed a rotting spot on the front tire that needed changing, and I was willing to overlook that issue since the bike was so well priced. On December 18th, we received the new tire, so we had to drive the bike to get them balanced and mounted. Since my husband has been riding longer and has more experience, we decided it would be better for him to ride the bike to the tire shop while I followed in the car with the new tires in the trunk. I kissed him and said, "Ride safe." We do this before any ride. And as we came up to the intersection, both of us made the green left-hand turn, and my husband cruised to the turn and begins to stand the bike up, but I watched in horror as the bike went out from under him, sliding on its left side, heading right, while my husband rolled at least 6 times. He gets up, he's clearly going into shock. All he could repeat was, "I don't know what happened, I don't know what happened." I was running back and forth between getting the bike out of the road. This was around 8 a.m. Morning rush hour was starting to accumulate, and tending to my husband, who was clearly in pain, but the man is just too stubborn to sit down. He looks at me all of a sudden white in the face and says, "I can't breathe." Well, that won him an instant call for an ambulance. They pick him up and rush into the local large trauma center here in our city. Turns out he broke his left collarbone, his left scapula, 3 ribs, and had a minor pneumothorax in his left lung. After one night, he was released from the hospital to recover at home. With physical therapy and plenty of rest, he recovered fairly quickly. And we also got the bike fixed up since she only had minor damage and everything that was broke was pretty easy to replace. Exactly 1 month later, down to the day, on January 18th, Brad decides he wants to take his first ride. It was a get back up on the horse kind of thing. He really missed riding. He really wanted to start working on his fear and get back on the road. Anyone that rides motorcycles will understand that need to just feel the wind in your face. He was too nervous to ride the GXSR that he crashed, so I took that bike and he rode my Honda CBR. The plan was a small 2-mile ride to the gas station down the street, fill up the bikes, and come home. Nothing crazy, nothing adventurous. While pulling into the gas station, I engaged the clutch and the bike stops instantly. I thought it was strange. I chalked it up to, well, maybe I accidentally engaged the brakes. Maybe I did something wrong. I shrugged it off and I filled the tank. As we pulled out, Brad's in front of me. At the time, we didn't have any comms because his unit was damaged in his accident, so we couldn't talk to each other, and I wanted to be behind him in case he was having any issues. I could see what was going on. I pull the clutch lever to slow down, and again, the bike instantly stops. At this point, I know something's terribly wrong, so I tried to catch up to Brad to signal I was having issues. And as I got to around 35 miles an hour, the bike starts bucking like a bronco. We're leaping down the street, and the last thing I remember was the engine made this high revving noise and seeing asphalt coming at my face. Thank God I had my helmet, but I didn't have my gloves or my riding jacket. The bike slid on its left side, heading right, while I rolled probably twice before coming to a stop. I had never broken a bone before, but I instantly knew something was wrong and I couldn't move my left arm. Also, going head first gave me neck pain, which won me a one-way trip in the ambulance to, you guessed it, the same trauma center as Brad. I had broken my left collarbone and had bruising on my left hip that we initially thought was broken, but thankfully the x-rays came back that it was fine. After being in the ER for 9 hours, I was moved upstairs to room 301, ironically the same room we had just been in the previous month. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days because every time I stood to use the restroom, I fainted from the pain. But eventually I was discharged and had to learn how to use only one arm. It took tons of therapy, both mental and physical, to work through the trauma. But slowly I was able to touch the bike, sit on it, and then start it. And then finally enough courage to make my first maiden voyage around the neighborhood. While I was down and out and recovering, a mechanical engineer friend of ours took the bike apart and discovered the brake return valve had malfunctioned, causing the brakes to be constantly engaged. But since it's a 1,000cc bike, the engine was able to push through the brakes. But when you would pull the clutch to disengage the engine power, the brakes would instantly take hold. For both of us, it was pure mechanical failure of the bike. It had nothing to do with faulty tires. It had nothing to do with operator error, strictly mechanical failure. Well, it's been over 8 months for Brad and 7 for me, but we're both 100% recovered. I credit the amazing nurses who took care of us. Yes, they did lecture us during my visit because we had just been there and apparently hadn't learned our lesson. If I could give one piece of advice, it would be always wear your helmet. I typically wear all my gear, but that day it was so brutally hot, I decided to leave my jacket and gloves at home. Initially, I was also going to ride without my helmet, but I had this nagging feeling that I needed it, and thank God I listened to that intuition. I still ride with the same helmet that has scratches on the left side and on the top. It's my constant reminder that not even once will I ever ride a bike without my helmet. I never thought my husband and I would crash the same motorcycle exactly 1 month apart down the day, break the same major bone, stay in the same room at the hospital while being attended by the same trauma nursing staff. I guess this just shows we are destined to be together. Thanks for the amazing podcast. I love what you're doing. It's awesome. Keep up the great work, and I cannot wait to hear what you come out with in the future. Thanks, Scott. Bye.